Today in the bunker, we're going to make an abandoned hangar suitable for the Wasteland. Recently I purchased the hangar kit to go with the terminal for the airport. This is the original box that it came in. This is probably from the late 50s, maybe early 60s. I'm not an expert on Plasticville, but I know it's old. Plus it's kind of falling apart. So the kit itself is kind of the standard, covered with some sort of yuck. So we're going to take this and scrub off all of the, I don't know if that's tape or what that is. There's some cellophane tape on here, or there was. But we're going to clean this up and get it ready to put together. After a quick wash with some dishwashing liquid and a little bit of warm water and a sponge, it cleaned up nicely. I just kind of dry fit this together, but all that scunge came off pretty much. There's a little bit, but we're going to paint over what there is, so not a problem. I'm debating whether or not to make a floor for this, or if this is just going to sit on a piece of tarmac. And I think I may make a floor just to add stability, because we're not going to glue the roof on. So we need something to help. It's kind of a big wobbly building otherwise. So let me get some mat board and we'll get a base made for this. All right, I've got a base cut out. What we're going to do is just glue the building together. I like to use the lines on the cutting mat to help square everything up. And then I just hit the little projecting tabs in there with some Plastruct cement or whatever kind of plastic cement you're using. And it doesn't take much, just a couple of spots to get that started. And then we can go back and do the seams and really make it strong. Now that we've got the edges glued together, it's still a tad wobbly, so we're going to go ahead and hot glue this down to this base. This is just mat board. You could use chipboard or whatever you have. I use this because it's fairly thin. I'm not going to put the sanding sealer on this one. We're just going to paint it, and that should be fine, and then we'll just paint it like concrete on the inside. Laid a bead of hot glue inside and out along the walls, and that's, I'll probably do the back here too. Should be strong enough to really hold this together pretty well. I try to make these things fairly gamer bulletproof. The next hurdle we have is this giant Plasticville airport that's molded into the roof. We're going to cover that up and try to hide that as best we can. The sign on the front's not a big deal. We'll make another sign to go over that. And the rest of this is fairly straightforward. I think we'll make probably some windows, both for the skylight and for the sides. All right, so what I'm going to do to cover this up is just build a framework around it with this kind of flat stock plastic that I've got. You could use balsa, you could use thin strips of chipboard, whatever you have, just to kind of get it at or above the level of those letters. And then I'm going to take some of this plasticard and we're going to put some rivets in it with our rivet tool, and we'll add that to the top, little panels, and that'll help hide that. I got a little off on my measurements, but I trimmed that up, so not a big deal. That cement just wicks in. You just could put a dot down basically and start it, and then you can lay this down and kind of lay it up next to it, and it'll wick underneath. And just do that on both sides. You can get a really good bond. So I'm going to measure out a piece to go across there out of this plasticard. We'll put some rivets on it, and then we'll get that glued on there as well. The piece that goes on the top, I've scored it along its length to make different panels, and then I take my rivet tool and just very carefully, and I also notched these to give the impression that they're separate pieces, and also so I can see from this side where those edge lines are, and we'll just punch in some rivets as we go, and then that'll make it look like riveted panels that will go on there. In case you wonder how this works, I've got an earlier video where I use this, but let's go ahead and pop a couple in here just so you can see. And you don't want to, you're obviously not trying to penetrate all the way through it, you're just trying to put an impression on it. So line it up where you would want that rivet to be, and then just push that and it'll make a little divot, and on the other side it makes a wonderful rivet. To help blend that in, I added a few other panels with rivets. It'll make it a little less obvious that that's just there. It'll look like just a larger repair than what's already been done. All right, so I believe we are just about ready to get this primed. Put our door back in. All right, so I think it's warm enough to do it, so let's go ahead and shoot some primer on this. I had to let this dry basically overnight due to the meteorological conditions. When I sprayed this, it did not want to dry very quickly, so I just left it overnight. We'll touch up some few spots where I missed. This is a obviously metal building because rivets, so I'm going to give this a dry brush with gunmetal, and then we'll apply some peeling paint. We're going to need to make a sign as well, and get this ready for the table. And for paint, I'm just going to use this gunmetal craft paint, and we'll dry brush that on, or kind of damp brush it. All right, we're just going to kind of, well, not really dry brush, more of an overbrush, and just build this up in layers. And you can do this as heavy or as light as you need to. As you can see though, that dry brushing with the silver or the overbrushing really makes those rivets pop. So it's worth doing that detail to add those. It adds a great deal of visual interest to the model. After dry brushing, well, overbrushing the whole building with that gunmetal color, you can see it builds up kind of a neat rusty metal appearance. And you could easily just leave it at this, do a little more weathering and call it good. I'm going to add a little bit of color, some peeling paint effect, and try to tart this up just a little bit for a little more visual interest. For the main door, I'm just adding some cardinal red, just whatever red you have is fine. I'm just putting it on with a sponge so it gives that peeling paint look. And you can just build that up to be as heavy or as light as you want. And I'm trying to keep it off the window sills or the windows themselves, because those are pretty much good to go as is, although you could make them a different color if you wanted to also. I'm going to add that same red color to the personnel doors, but because it's kind of hard to hold onto the brush for one thing, get in there with the sponge, I'm going to stipple that on with an old brush. That way I can kind of control it better. All right, after much sponging, applied some of that dirty white color all over. And, like I said, you just build that up as much as you want or as little as you want. And you could just easily just cover the whole thing and make it look fairly new. I hit the windows in a couple of spots with the sponge. Not a big deal. I just went back with some burnt umber, and I'm just going to touch up those areas. You could just redo the whole window in that color if you wanted to, and then add some lighter rust, and that's fine. All right, so I went back and covered up those spots on the windows. Once that dries well, I'm going to kind of overbrush that with some metallics again, and then we'll move on to our next color. So I'm going to use a light gray just to touch up around the base that I've got on here. We'll give that kind of a concrete color. And just like the main portion of the building, for the roof, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of black and pewter gray just to give it kind of a faded black effect. And we're going to sponge that on and just build that up as heavy or as light as you want. I'm going to try and avoid getting on these patched panels just to look like later repairs. Alright, after sponging on that black-gray mixture, you can see that there's some metallic and some rust colors that showed through on the roof itself. Then I went back with the sponge again and just used a nutmeg color to build up layers on the steel bits that we added, and then the window frames and the windsock holder and all that good stuff, just to build up a rust layer. This has a very subtle texture. I don't know how well it comes across in the camera, but you can actually see it. And same thing with these windows all the way around. I went back and just added some lighter rust color, sort of a rusty highlight, a little bit extra there, on all of the windows, including on the front door. I mentioned before, one of the few drawbacks to the Plasticville stuff, it's more of a kind of an annoyance than anything else, is that everything says Plasticville on it. So I've taken to just making my own signs and covering them up. In this case, you know, obviously we covered that up. We want to cover this up. So I just made one that'll fit. I got some on there. Made one that will fit over there. So we'll just super glue that in place. I made this with some mat board. You could use chipboard or whatever. Just printed it off on the printer and just Mod Podged the whole thing, and then sponged on some dark gray just to sort of age the sign. And also, the containers that all of the tufts that I use come in, these are the Army Painter tufts. I'm going to cut pieces of this plastic out, and we're going to make windows for this, and we'll glue those in place. So there's the first one. I don't know if you can, I guess you can see it. I put that in with super glue. That may fog over part of it. That's fine. I'm gonna, when I paint this with dull coat, I'm gonna paint over that anyway, so these windows will be dirty, and you can't almost see through them. So that'll be fine. If you wanted them to be clean, I would use like PVA to put those in. It just takes a lot longer to dry. And I would do it after, obviously, you put on your sealer. Alright, we've got glass in all of the windows, some of it broken. I don't know if you can really see that. Probably that'll show up better once I hit that and make it dirty with the varnish. But I'm going to let that set for a little bit, let the glue set up, and I just use super glue on all of these, and then we will go and put some varnish on this. Alright, I'm pretty happy with how that came out. The glass, once you hit it with a little bit of that dull coat, it gives it a very dirty look and makes it a lot easier to see across the table too. You can definitely tell there's some dirty windows in there and where they're broken and all that good stuff. So we added some little tufts, and I went back and stippled on a little bit more gray just for some variation on that concrete. But that's basically pretty much it. There's a lot more you could do. Add graffiti. You could board over windows. I'm going to leave the windsock holder open to put a flag or an antenna or whatever. This may be a base of operations for some faction, but it's got lots of space inside, so let's make a good one. So there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was useful. I was going to make a runway on this video, but it's already so long, I'm just going to do that as my next video. So we'll work on some tarmac and some runway stuff here in just a little bit. But anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I appreciate you watching. Have a great day.